Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the VMblog Expert Interview Series. And today we have a familiar face with us, Bill Andrews, the President and CEO of ExaGrid. Bill, thanks for joining us once again. It's great to have you back.
Thank you, David, and I appreciate it.
Before we jump in, and I know there are a lot of different topics I want to try to hit on, but if you wouldn't mind, maybe just give a quick elevator pitch overview of ExaGrid for folks.
Sure. So ExaGrid's in the backup storage space. So we sit behind backup applications in the data center, right? Veeam, Commvault, NetBackup, Oracle RMAN, Rubrik, etc. We go after sort of the upper mid-market to the enterprise, and there's always a backup application we show up, and we tend to replace either primary storage behind the backup application or deduplication appliances behind the backup application. If it's primary storage, it's not always scalable the way the customer wants. It's not always the right performance because it's tweaked for maybe transactional files or NAS files, but not large backup jobs. It's not secure because it's network facing without any additional security features, etc. And it's expensive with retention. The longer the retention in weeklies, monthlies, and yearlies, the more it costs because you just need a lot more storage. Against deduplication appliances, let's say like a Dell Data Domain, it's inline deduplication, so it lowers the amount of storage, but because it's inline, it's very slow. You're trying to do all this deduplication work during the backup window, and it slows everything down. The restores are extremely slow because all the data is only stored deduplicated, so you've got to wait till it all gets rehydrated. There's no scale out. It's a front-end controller, and you just add disk shelf capacity, which means as the data grows, the backup window gets longer and longer and longer. And again, it's network facing for security. So to net out where is ExaGrid different here, we came in with a tiered backup storage architecture. We said, hey, all of this matters. It matters that you have fast ingest performance for the shortest backup window possible to keep the load off the network and off the servers. So we have a landing zone where you write directly to the landing zone, no inline deduplication slowing the backups down. We optimize the operating system and ExaGrid for large backup jobs, so we're very fast at handling very large files coming into ExaGrid. We do job concurrency, where we can do jobs in parallel. We use advanced protocols such as the Veeam Data Mover or maybe NetBackup OST. We integrate to the backup applications for front-end load balancing, such as Commvault Spill and Fill, or Oracle RMAN channels, or maybe Veeam Sober or NetBackup disk pooling, etc. We also take the load off the backup application by doing encryption at rest at the hardware level. Instead of having to take a 20% hit to the backup window, we do it in nanoseconds in the drives from Western Digital and Seagate inside of our appliances. So we do a number of things for that. The restores are fast because we keep the most recent backups on the landing zone for fast restores, because those are the ones you want back quickly, the ones to restore a deleted file, overwritten file, corrupted file, encrypted file, etc. And then all the long-term retention, which you have plenty of time to recover from, we then deduplicate into our second tier, which is called the repository tier. And we do that adaptively. We don't do it inline, but we don't wait till the backups are done either. As the backups are coming into us, in parallel, we're deduplicating those into our repository. In addition, that repository is non-network facing. So the threat actors can't see or get to our repository tier. So if there's any kind of threat attack, where let's say the Dell Data Domain is wiped out, or maybe some NetApp E series or Dell disk or whatever, or any kind of straight disk, like HPE Nimble, which they call Alera now, our front end would get wiped out too, but we have all the data deduplicated in the non-network facing tier. We have delayed deletes. We have immutable data objects, and I'll throw a teaser. In about a week or so, we're going to announce an AI feature that's very cool for that as well. So we have that. And then in addition, we do all the rest of the stuff. We have disaster recovery to the public clouds. We have disaster recovery to third parties. We have disaster recovery to second site data centers. We do triple hop, A to B, A to C, A to B, A to C, and et cetera, all the way down the line, in order so that if you have you want a third tertiary hop, we can do that. We do data center topologies where we can have multiple data centers, each cross-replicating, so you have disaster recovery at an opposite data center. So we have a lot of enterprise features, And we're the only ones that sort of focus on building just backup storage. The primary storage is just primary storage thrown behind the backup app. The deduplication appliances, if you look, you haven't seen any software features on those for years, right? So we're pretty much now the only ones doing that. And I'll net it out by saying one thing. You have the big players, the Dells, the Hewlett-Packards, the network appliances, et cetera, that do great on the primary storage side. You take away the big brands, and ExaGrid is the largest backup storage vendor on the planet now, other than the Dells, HPs of the world.
Now, the talking heads out there have opinions on this one way or the other. But based on your real world experience and you talking with customers, do you see the majority of primary data remaining on premises in the data center, or is it still moving to the cloud or not?
So I've been around the data center for 40 years and I've only dealt with the data center. So this is where I live. It's actually slowed way down because it's too expensive. Everybody has figured out how expensive it is. And like anything, everything has its place in life. So is the public cloud got value? Absolutely. For certain workloads and certain use cases. So everybody's figured out now, I'm going to keep certain workloads and use cases in my data center, and others I'm going to move to the public cloud. For example, if I need burstable compute, I'm not going to keep all that compute in my data center sitting idle at a high cost. I'll use the cloud because I'll pay only when I need the compute. If I, so for like a DevOps type of application, right? I might put my primary storage archive data in the public cloud because you never touch it. It's data you haven't touched in 4 years anyway. What's the likelihood you're going to touch it in the next 4 years? But your backup data, way too expensive because the clouds charge for egress and they charge for ingress and they charge every time you open a file, delete a file, change a file. And in backup, you're purging the data every week. Once you hit your full retention, every week you're deleting. So it becomes too expensive. So I think everybody's figured out that hybrid cloud is where it's going. They're going to have some part of their stuff as SaaS. They're going to go get their NetSuite and their Concur and their Workday and their Salesforce. Some certain use cases are going to go to the cloud. And a lot of it, the majority of it is staying on premise. I would say if you go back to like 2014 to 2018, you would have swore that there wouldn't have been a data center left on the planet. Now it's a rare day when we show up at a customer, they're saying the word cloud. It has swung a lot.
Yeah. Now, keeping on that track, what do you consider some of the main considerations that IT data centers have when choosing a backup storage?
Yeah, so there's 6 or 7 big ones, right? First is performance. They've got to get those backups done. They can't have the backups soaking the application servers and soaking the network at noontime and 2 in the afternoon when people are working. So they want these backups done by 6 a.m. So ingest performance is always number one with our customers. Fast restores because your highest cost is your people. You look most people's balance sheet, it's the people that cost them the most. So you want them as productive as you can get them, which means when somebody says, oh my God, my hair's on fire, I overwrote a file, or I deleted a file, and my file's corrupted, I can't open it, you want to be able to get it back to them fast. So fast restores usually is number 2. Security comes right up after that, right? And it's more than just ransomware recovery. It's protecting the data first, right? It's having all of the features it takes to do that. SMB signing and TLS search, et cetera, and then RBAC, et cetera. And on top of that, it's also when there's a ransomware attack, when that primary data is encrypted, and that's not the only thing they do now, they copy it as well. So I might laugh at them and say, hey, I can recover the data, but what if they copied it? So you want to be able to recover from that. You care about scalability. They work hard to get the performance to get their backup window back down from 11 in the morning to 6 in the morning. And then as they add data, it just re-expands. So having scale out where you bring compute with capacity so that the backup window stays fixed length becomes crucial, right? There's disaster recovery. There's cost. There's what's the cost up front and the cost over time. All of that matters. And then, of course, products that just work, so you don't have the time anymore. And customer support, where you've got local people that speak your language, that are senior people, that don't keep pushing you around because you don't have the time anymore to mess around. You need to just have things work, and when they don't, you need it resolved quickly. So this is all the things customers talk to us about.
And so what choices then do IT data centers have for backup storage, and how do they meet those requirements?
So this is why we're in business, right? Because the only choices are primary storage and taking whatever they use on the primary storage side and put it behind the backup application, or deduplication appliances. And neither one of those now are meeting all the requirements I just said. They're too costly, they're too slow, they're not scalable. And as a result, we came out with an architecture that was sort of taking the best of both worlds. We knew you had to have fast backups and fast restores, so you couldn't do inline deduplication. We knew you had to drop costs, so you have to have deduplication for all of the long-term retention. We know that data keeps going, so you had to have scale out. So when we designed this, we made the list I just went through a minute ago and said, we need something that does all of these. Disk can give you pretty fast, not really fast, but pretty fast backups and good restores. But it's too expensive. It doesn't scale. It's not secure, etc. Deduplication appliances can help you collapse the amount of data to lower the cost, but it's really slow for backups, really slow for restores. So we said everything has trade-offs. How do we take the best of this, and then not just put one in front of the other, build an integrated system so it's totally transparent and totally integrated?
Now, you sort of touched on this. We hear a lot about, the dreaded ransomware attack. And obviously, we all know having a backup is great, and that's one part of it. But what needs to be considered for being able to restore after an attack? Can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so what happens with all of these attacks is it's usually a phishing attempt of some sort. It's an email, and some employee clicks on it because they all look real now. And now you launch code in your network. And that code is going to watch and track user passwords. It sees everything you're doing, and it starts to learn all of your passwords. And they now have your passwords to log into the routers and the switches and the scanners and everything. So they either A, log in at night when nobody's paying attention and shut the scanners off so there's no alerts. And then they start copying data and they ultimately encrypt all the data. Sometimes they go after the backup storage first because they know that's where you're going to go to recover it from, right? So they either go at the backup app, log into the backup app and delete the backup storage, or they find a rogue server and snake their way to the backup storage, or they issue some other commands, but they find a way to delete the backup storage. And sometimes they do that first and then encrypt the primary data. Sometimes they encrypt the primary data and then go for the backup storage. So in our mind, we have to have the following. We had to have a way, and we're the only ones that have this two-tier approach. We had to have a network-facing tier so that when they issue the delete commands and data domains wiped out and NetApp E-Series disk is wiped out and HPE disk is wiped out, etc., and pure storage disk is wiped out, SSD, that our landing zone gets wiped out, but it doesn't matter because we have all the data, including what was in our landing zone, in that repository deduplicated, and they can't see it and they can't get at it because only our object code talks to it. It's not on the network. It's not network-facing. It's literally the only thing talking to it is our object code. And so as a result of that, that means all the data is there. And we have everything's immutable, which means all the data objects, all the deduplicated data objects can't be changed or modified, etc. But then we further have what's called a delayed delete policy because you don't want to keep data forever. So you can set up and say, don't delete the data right away. Why? I don't know if a delete request coming into our landing zone is operational delete from the IT people or a threat actor delete. So we need to know that. So as a result, you have an attack on Tuesday, your hair's on fire, and you say, oh my God, we had an attack. Well, ExaGrid, thank God, wiped out on the front, but they didn't delete the data in the repository anyway. Let's just go freeze that so we know when we're ready to recover, we can. And we go from there. Now, you might say, well, what happens if you go outside your delete window? Or what happens if somebody doesn't take that action? We'll stay tuned because that's we're announcing in a few weeks.
Now, you talked about doing, taking the best of whichever world it is and where you need it. You talked about on-prem, public cloud, hybrid cloud. In your opinion, what's the best option that companies should be looking at right now for disaster recovery?
So disaster recovery usually falls into two camps. It's not as difficult as I know it looks on the surface. If you have a second data center, it's a rare day people don't use it. It's less expensive, more secure, and very fast to recover. If you put your data in a cloud, it's weeks and months to get it out, and it's expensive. So if you go to bigger accounts, it's a rare day they don't do the disaster recovery at one of their other data centers. If you go down market, more towards the SMB, they don't have a second data center. So their only choice is to go to the public clouds, AWS or Azure, go to a vendor cloud, or go to an MSP cloud, right? Because tons of MSPs have clouds, because they don't have a choice. The problem is time to recovery is very, very slow in that case. But you don't have a choice anyway because you don't have a second data center. So what you want to have for disaster recovery is you want a complete set of the data up to date offsite, right? So you've got to deduplicate it quickly, you got to replicate it quickly so it's offsite. And you want the recovery time will be fast. The recovery point, the RPO, is always going to be a tiny bit behind, right? Because you got the WAN and the latency and everything else. But you're not going to lose hours of data. You're going to lose minutes of data, but not going to lose hours of data. And of course, today's world, everybody's really talking about DR. Floods, how many do you see on the news? Fires, how many are you seeing on the news? Earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, right, etc. A lot. And they're bigger and bigger, and they're doing more and more damage. So we're getting more and more requests for our ability to do a tertiary copy. I've got my main location and 3 hours away, another data center, and people are saying, but that's not good enough. I want something, 8 states away or 2 countries away, right? And in our case, just, we do 45% of our business outside of the United States. So we have a big international business, and we have installations in 81 countries around the world now at customers. So they want a tertiary site. So they want the main data center to replicate to one DR site and another, or to the first one, and then have that hop to the second one, depending on what their network topology is. So as a result of that, you got to have all of those things. We can replicate to Azure and AWS if you want your data there. We can have people take our gear into third-party service clouds, and we have that for DR as a service. You can take our appliances and put them on-prem at your own second data center, which at least half of our customers do. And you can, like I said, you can triple hop and make sure that you got that tertiary copy.
Now, dialing things back or getting into the details a little bit more, thinking of like the storage hardware. What about SSD? Is that a good choice for backup storage or no?
Depends. Everything depends.
Right.
Everything in technology has trade-offs, right? There's always a trade-off. Is a Porsche a nice car? Yes, but you got to spend over $100,000 to get one. Oh, there's a trade-off there. So the first thing is SSD, by the way, is not necessarily faster for backups. In fact, we're faster every time we test against SSD. And you say, how can that be? And it's because that you're not using the right protocols. You're trying to do the encryption, on the fly. You are not doing job concurrency, all the things I talked about earlier. And so it's the software that's slowing it down. And the SSD is back there yawning, going, please send me some data. But you can't beat SSD for restore speeds. So when people say, I have to have very fast restore speeds, SSD is the way to go in storage and backup storage. However, you'll pay, right? It's a lot more expensive than HDD. Secondly, there are data centers out there that are saying, we don't want HDD anymore. Sometimes because they're saying, we don't want anything that can break, that spins. But mostly it's because of energy, power and cooling, especially in certain, EMEA countries, where the power and electricity costs are through the moon, and the SSD actually gets offset from the savings you're going to get. So today, ExaGrid has HDD, and once again, I'll say stay tuned.
Now, we're going to stay tuned. I definitely want to hear about that when the time comes. But in the meantime, if you could break out your crystal ball and talk to us, where do you see backup, or more specifically, the backup storage market headed as we move into 2026?
So remember that we're in the upper mid market up through the enterprise. And if you go backwards in time, the backup applications you saw were Commvault, NetBackup, Dell Networker, Dell Avamar, and IBM TSM/Spectrum Protect. You look forward, Dell Networker doing this. Dell Avamar doing this, IBM TSM doing this, and what's growing? Veeam, Commvault, Rubrik, Cohesity, and of course, Cohesity acquired NetBackup. My suspicion is NetBackup will go to those other four. So if you project out a few years in our part of the market, you're just going to see Veeam, Commvault, Rubrik, and Cohesity. Today, ExaGrid supports Veeam, Commvault, and Rubrik, and we announced a couple months ago that in the first half of 2026, we'll be supporting Cohesity as well. The good news for us is all four of those companies now are basically telling customers, go buy whatever storage you want. For a while, there was this end-to-end craze, right? And that seems to have abated. Those guys don't want to sell backup storage anymore at the Rubriks and the Cohesities. They're software companies. They want software-like margins, software-like, balance sheets. And they're telling people, go buy what you want. In fact, Cohesity was quoted in our press release, right? It's not like we're doing it in a vacuum. We're working with them, and they're doing a great technically supporting us as we're developing, sitting behind Cohesity. So we believe that those are going to be the big four backup apps down the road. NetBackup will be around probably the longest of the older crew, but it will fade away as time comes as well. In the backup storage world, we're sitting here giddy right now because the big primary storage guys aren't coming out with any features. They're not developing their primary storage to work behind backup. There's not a single feature in their primary storage that was designed for backup. And the deduplication appliances, we haven't seen a new feature in those in years. They're just fading away as well. So we're sitting here developing, making what we're doing bigger and better. And you'll say, well, why don't those companies develop? That's not where their focus is. Their focus right now is selling storage and servers for AI. They're manically focused, as they should be, on that, not on backup. So you're going to see the networkers and the Avamars and the HPE Storences and the data domains, they're going to, over time, keep going down. That's not where their attention is, in our opinion.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. Well, Bill, this has been great information as always. I always appreciate you taking the time out to speak to me and updating the VMblog audience. And you gave us a nice little tease there of something new to come. So we'll keep our eyes out for that and share it as it's out there. But anyway, again, thank you again. Always a pleasure to have you on with VMblog.
Well, we appreciate having me on, and love to do it again sometime.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
All right.